Want to draft your own pencil skirt that fits so well you want to make one in every color without buying a commercial pattern? In this tutorial, I'll show you how to make a custom pencil skirt pattern from your own measurement, step by step. Hi, I'm Helena and this is Curve and Stitch, where we craft curves one stitch at a time. Let's dive in. This is the basic tools you need for the drafting. Grab your measuring tape. You will need waist, hip, skirt length and waist to hip depth. I have a detailed video on the channel where I went in detail how to take these measurements. I have linked it up here in the card and also in the description below. Start by leaving some few inches before drawing your waist guideline. In this tutorial, I left about 2 inches. Now draw a straight line to use as your waist guideline. Now working on our waist guideline, we need to input our waist measurement. So the waist measurement we will need to put here is full waist circumference divided by 4. Mark this point, then add half an inch for that intake. Now we need to shape our waistline. From the point we just made, you go up by half an inch. Then you join it with a smooth curve to the waistline like so. Now we need our waist to hip depth measurement. So from the waist, measure down your waist to hip depth measurement, which in this case is 10 inches. So I'll measure and mark 10 inches like so. Draw a straight line to create your hip guideline. Now from the waist, measure down your skirt length measurement, which in this case I'm using 24. So I'll measure down from the waist 24 and mark. Then draw a straight line to use as the hem guideline or the skirt length measurement. Let me go ahead and label the lines so I don't cause any confusions. Now on the hip guideline, measure and mark 1/4 of your full hip circumference plus ease. Then on the hem guideline, measure and mark 1/4 of your hip circumference measurement. Then go in by 1.5 inches like so. Join the point on the hip line to the point on the hem line with a straight line like so. Then connect the waist to the hip with a smooth curve like so. Don't forget the dart. They are key to a flattering fit around the waist. Now we need to add our dart. So you look for the midpoint of the waist measurement. In this case it's 3. So I'll mark 3 inches from the center front. Then I'll go down and then mark 3 inches just to get a straight line down. And the length of the dart, I'm using 3.5 inches. So I'll measure from the waist down 3.5 inches. The dart intake we added to our waist was half an inch. Divide the half inch mark equally and place each on both sides of the line like so. Draw your dart like so. Now go ahead and add your seam allowance and hem allowance to the pattern. In this case, I added half inch to the side seam and waistline, then 1 inch to the hem line. Connect the seam allowance points to create the seam allowance lines. Your front pattern is ready. You can now go ahead and cut it out. And don't forget to label all the parts. Now let's go ahead and draft the back part of the pattern. It follows the same process, only that we will be adding zip allowance to the back part. Since we'll be adding zip allowance, we will need to create our center back line. So from the edge of the paper, we will measure and mark 1 inch for our zip allowance. Then we will use this mark to draw our center back line. Join these points to create your center back line like so. So now you'll be using the center back line as a start point for the circumference measurements. So on the waist guideline, we will measure and mark 1/4 of our waist circumference measurement, which in this case is 6 inches. So we will measure and mark 6 inches. Then we will add 1 inch dart to the 6 inches, making 7 inches. So from the 7 inches mark, you go up by half an inch and mark like so. Join the half inch mark back to the waist guideline with a smooth curve like so. Now we need our waist to hip depth measurement. So from the waist, measure down your waist to hip depth measurement. Draw a straight line to use as your hip guideline. Measure and mark 1/4 of your hip circumference measurement on the hip guideline, like so. Again, from the waist, measure down the skirt length measurement, which in this case is 24. So from the waist, I'll measure down 24 inches and mark like so. Draw a straight line to create the hem guideline like so. So on the hem guideline, measure and mark the hip circumference measurement, which in this case is 8 inches. Then you subtract 1.5 from the 8 inches and mark inward like so. The amount you subtract from the hip on the hem line depends on how tapered you want the skirt to be. But make sure you don't go too much, otherwise you wouldn't be able to walk in the skirt. Now we need to place our dart, so we will look for the midpoint on the waist guideline. So in this case it's 3 inches. So I'll mark 3 inches on the waistline like so. I'm just making sure that the dart will be straight. So from the center back, I'm marking 3 inches again so that I'll get a straight line. Now on the waistline, the mark you made for the dart, divide the dart we added to the waist equally on both sides of that mark like so. The length of the back dart is 5 inches. Now add your seam allowance to the pattern. In this case, I'm using 1/2 inch for the waistline, 1/2 inch for the hem side seam, then 1 inch for the hem. Your back pattern is also ready. Connect the seam allowance points to create the seam allowance lines. And that's it. You've drafted your very own pencil skirt pattern and it's tailored just for you. If you find this helpful, hit the like button and let me know in the comments what fabric you'll be making your pencil skirt with. Don't forget to subscribe for more beginner-friendly drafting tutorials like this one. Crafting curves, one stitch at a time. Bye bye.